Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant. Today, I'm going to be discussing the third in a trilogy I've been discussing for a while now. It is Return to Camerein. Written by Rick Shelley. He's the one who wrote the Buchanan campaign, and then after that, The Fires of Coventry. And what I really like about this book, and the trilogy overall, and I couldn't really put words to it until today when I was thinking about this book. What really makes this book and this trilogy interesting is that it looks at civilians in active theaters of conflict from different angles each time. And what do I mean by that? Well, in the Buchanan campaign, the story was about a war starting because a nation state, a free independent nation state, is invaded by the Federation, and then it requests help from the Commonwealth. The way it involves the civilians is that in that case, the colony is too small to put up a fight, so they need to request help from someone else. But the prominent civilian character is volunteering to help the Marines because in his mind, he is helping keep his community free. So in that one, the civilians, for the most part, are captured, but one of them is fighting because he wants to help his community regain their independence. The second book, The Fires of Coventry, are civilians in a different way. This is a more populated world, and it's one of the core worlds of the Commonwealth. And the Federation is burning every house they can see and turning the civilian population into a refugee population. So in the first one, they were left in their homes. They were told, "You're one of us now, we're conquering you." Whereas this one, in The Fires of Coventry, they're just being ejected, told, "Go off to the next city, we're burning every single one of the houses, every single one of the communities, every single part of this city, we're glassing that city." And so the civilians encounter a bigger and bigger caravan. It's more and more people gathering to walk over this mountain pass to the next city. And that emphasis also includes, because it's a huge civilian population, there are civilians who are pregnant, and one of the main cast of civilians is pregnant, is about to deliver when the invasion happens, and she needs to be able to deliver safely, but also quietly enough that the Federation soldiers don't move in and kill the civilians. So there's that book, which focuses on the civilians as refugees, as victims, whereas this book, Return to Camerein, is a book that focuses on two types of civilian in a weird way. And what I mean by that is the war started technically before the events of the Buchanan campaign, where an entire fleet is just wiped out. They never hear from the fleet at Camerein ever again. And Camerein, for all intents and purposes, is cut off from the rest of the Commonwealth. But seeing as it's mostly a resort colony, where the communities that exist there are to support wealthier people, wealthier citizens that spend vacations there, because it's that kind of world, there's less of an emphasis on retaking it. And as you find out in the beginning of Return to Camerein, one of the royal family, because like I said, the Commonwealth is effectively sci-fi UK, and the Federation is Sci-Fi US, and those two are the two only powers in this setting, and really the only two communities. It doesn't sound like there's really any large multi-planetary free colonies. There are, like the colony in the Buchanan campaign, smaller independent solar systems in the space between the Federation and the Commonwealth. And as you learn in this book, there is one mercenary colony where it's a larger planet of a pretty sizable population, but the people that exist there almost exclusively exist as mercenaries and as an uncommitted third and neutral party to the war. Return to Camerein has two, like an A plot and a B plot for the military side of things, and it has a single plot for the civilian side of things. As it turns out, like I said earlier, one of the royal family is on Camerein, and the Commonwealth has been waiting for a while, hoping that prince is still alive, but knowing that they cannot return to Camerein until they are at a sturdy enough position in the war. And at the start of the book, they feel confident enough that they are. They have been winning enough battles, but they're also getting to a neutral enough position that they can work with that third party world to negotiate a peace agreement with the Federation. And so, honestly, I kind of misspoke earlier. There's an A, a B, and a C plot that's going on. The A plot is Spencer, who is, what's his rank here? Captain David Spencer. Captain David Spencer has been in each of the books as a Marine, as a kind of special forces Marine. And in the first book, he's the one that is helping the lone volunteer civilian. And in Return to Camerein, he has been assigned to go down to the surface of the world with I want to say it's a regiment, so somewhere in the ballpark of 100 to 150 men, and they are told to determine if the prince is alive and evacuate him to a safe place if he is. But when they get there, their transport ships are pushed out of that solar system, and the drop ship is blown out of the sky. The Federation has a trap set up for anyone trying to return to Camerein, but they also don't know that the prince is down there as a potential bargaining chip. All they know is that a ground force was sent down to the surface of the planet, and they don't know why. So now we shift our focus back to those civilians. When the war started, the planet was taken over by the Federation, but a number of civilians were kind of left stranded at a very remote and very specific resort. And so Captain David Spencer, his people go down to the surface, they find those civilians, they get a rocket out sending a message, we found them and we're going to this such and such place to try and evac. While they're doing that, there's an entire squadron of Federation troops, many times their number, bearing down on those Marines. And so they need to evacuate the civilians, but they also need to do it relatively safely and without getting them killed. And in this case, it has a smaller cast of civilians. It gives a lot of them a chance to shine, but it also gives them a chance to step up and kind of are conscripted into helping the fight, because the Marines kind of know at that point they need every bit of reinforcement that they can get, so they conscript those civilians. So there's that side of things. Like I mentioned, there is also another plot where a group of officers are going to that third party to try and get them as a mercenary state, a mercenary nation state, to help them negotiate peace with the Federation. And then lastly, there's a third plot. There's kind of like a third military plot, a C plot, where the forces that were at Camerein to help out the Marines end up in a bizarre situation where they're stuck permanently in their faster than light travel, and it's incredibly dangerous to go out and fix it because they're not certain that their craft will survive slowing back down to standard speeds. And even if they do, they may not be in a place that they can navigate from. They may have jumped too far, they may have jumped too short, they may have jumped in the wrong direction entirely. And so there's a C plot about the ship HMS Avon that ends up drifting. The ship was not within a dozen light years of any inhabited world. It wasn't within 4 light years of any star. But the ship's charts and equipment had been equal to determining Avon's position. And so they send out one of their message rockets, and that one's I'm skipping over, I'm glossing over that plot for a couple reasons, but in each of these books, the Commonwealth develops new methods of using their faster than light travel and new innovations with their own hardware. So this shows that even in the waning days of the war, they're still developing, and those developments, they aren't shown to the Federation at all, but are another tool in their belt if they ever go to war again. They know they can use this, and they know how to get out of this bad situation, but they also know how they got into that situation, and maybe they can force the Federation into that kind of situation. It's one of those C plots where it's not critical to the actual story, but it is tying up a loose end of what happens to these characters. In a way, it almost feels like filler, but it really isn't. Not everyone is ultra wealthy in Camerein. There are some hotel staff as well. And what that means is that each one is kind of interacting with their predicament in different ways. But for the most part, a lot of them are traumatized by the long years of just really supplementing their diet with hunting in the woods. They're, using replicators to recycle food from waste. And that isolation starts wearing on them. And intense situations, they don't necessarily all keep their heads. And that's actually a major plot point in the climax, where one of them is just so stressed out that they kind of dissociate from what is going on and end up believing that they're in a different situation entirely, and firing their gun that they had been assigned, thinking that they're on a morning hunt for the birds that they would be bringing back for that small community, that survivor community, ends up triggering a firefight because it lets the Federation know where they are. And from there, it's a desperate fight to hold on to save these civilians. They end up running really low on ammunition, and like in the first book, the Buchanan campaign, it's hold out for 28 minutes, we'll get there as soon as we can and blow up everything between point A and point B. And the Marines just think, in 28 minutes, we're going to be dead. And that kind of happens in this one as well. It almost gets to that point, just like in Buchanan campaign. It almost gets to that point, they hold out, and that unit is decimated. It just barely survives. but it survives, and a number of the civilians end up being evacuated. I believe some of them that do end up being conscripted die in their retreat, but it's a really fun way to close up this trilogy with looking at the way the innovations have affected naval warfare, the way civilians interact with this war, and how the military, the grunts on the ground, interact with the changes in the war as well. How the veterans know how the Federation Marines are going to react and act in these situations, and what they can do to halt their advance. These people are now very experienced with the war and with their roles in that unit, but it does take its toll. A lot of them, I think, don't really have an idea of what they're going to do after the war, because for 7-8 years, that's all they've known. The last chapters are only about 14 pages in length. On page 316, it ends with 8 hours after reaching Victoria, the commandos and the civilians they had rescued were transferred to HMS Sheffield. Quarters had been prepared for them. An hour later, Sheffield jumped to Q space on her way back to Buckingham. The war was over, its last battle a victory for the Commonwealth. And then the following 14 pages are the closure to the entire story. Captain David Spencer ends up being elevated to Lord Spencer, Baron of a specific community, and there is some payout at this point. So there is that closure for a lot of those characters, but it focuses on David Spencer, it focuses on those close to him, it focuses on the one prince that served with David Spencer in the first book and who interacted somewhat in the second book and was the deliverer of the mission, the person who assigned the mission in Return to Camerein. So it brings it full circle. It's a really fun trilogy. I loved it. I sent a copy of this trilogy to a friend of mine who is a corpsman, and at the time I sent him a care package with these 3 books. I sent him a care package with a anthology that holds 3 books. It's Orcs, I want to say, something like that. It's a really fun dark fantasy story, but this was one of those books I really liked. He really enjoyed the Marines' perspective, and I really enjoyed throughout this the way the civilians react and step up at the different stressors in their life. So the Buchanan campaign, the Fires of Coventry, and the Return to Camerein, that trilogy is really amazing. The author, Rick Shelley, he's written a number of other science fiction stories as well, and so I recommend this author. I've read this book a couple times, I've read the trilogy a couple times, and I think if any of this war science fiction story and what I've ranted about clicks with you, you're going to want to read this book. It is a really, really great trilogy. I don't even remember how much for this. I've paid for each of the books twice at this point. It is worth the money I've put into it, and I really enjoyed it. So yeah, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant.